He was the outlaw among outlaws, the man who lived outside Nashville's rules, and for decades Allan Coe carried grudges that burned hotter than the spotlight itself. Fans know him for songs that rattled the industry, but what most never knew was the private list he kept close, a list of 7 musicians who crossed him so deeply that forgiveness never came. Now, at 85, after years of silence, Allan Coe finally names them. Some were rivals, some were former friends, and others were icons the public believed he admired. But behind closed doors, his feelings were brutal, bitter, and unfiltered. These aren't passing disagreements or friendly rivalries. This is hate in its purest form, sharpened by betrayal, jealousy, and scars from the outlaw country wars. And when Coe finally speaks, no one is spared. Allan Coe's story in Nashville was never one of easy welcomes or open arms. From the moment he stepped into Music Row, he was branded as an outsider, a man too raw and too dangerous for the polished image the country establishment wanted to sell. He had the voice of a convict, the heart of a poet, and the swagger of a man who had already stared down death more than once. But Nashville wasn't built to embrace men like him. Labels wanted clean suits and clean reputations, and Coe had neither. He had scars from prison, tattoos before they were fashionable, and songs that cut too deep into the bone of truth. It didn't take long before whispers turned to closed doors. Coe was good enough to write hits, but the town wanted those hits sung by safer voices. His songs were recorded by George Jones, Tanya Tucker, and Johnny Paycheck, yet his own chances were always sabotaged by executives who saw him as a liability. This created a deep wound inside Coe, a belief that Nashville had robbed him of his rightful place, and he never forgave those who went along with it. At smoky bars and roadside diners, he watched as other musicians, some with less talent in his view, soared past him because they played the game, shook the right hands, and smiled at the right parties. That was never Coe's way. He was too blunt, too honest, and too unwilling to bow. What stung most was the hypocrisy. The same industry that dismissed him for being too vulgar would later embrace outlaws when it became profitable, putting Willie, Waylon, and others at the forefront, while pushing Coe to the shadows. He respected some of those men, but deep down, he felt he had been cheated out of his crown. And from those years in Nashville came the first names that would one day make his list of hatred. Some were singers who mocked him behind his back. Others were powerful players who pulled strings to keep him out. To Coe, they weren't just rivals. They were thieves, stealing not only opportunities, but a piece of his soul. And as the years went on, his bitterness only hardened. The first name Allan Coe revealed was one that sent shockwaves through the country music world: Willie Nelson. To the public, Willie and Coe were often lumped together in the outlaw country movement, two men who stood outside Nashville's control. But behind the scenes, Coe harbored a bitterness toward Nelson that never faded. It wasn't about talent. Coe respected Willie's songwriting and his ability to charm audiences. What Coe hated was how easily Nelson became the face of the outlaw image, while Coe was left fighting for scraps. In Coe's eyes, Willie played the game, smiling for cameras, doing duets, and striking deals with the same industry that had once spit on the outlaw idea. Coe believed that while he was fighting tooth and nail to prove that outlaws couldn't be controlled, Nelson slipped into the spotlight and reaped the rewards without paying the same price. What made the wound deeper was the way Willie distanced himself from Coe publicly. While Nelson stood with Waylon Jennings and Chris Christopherson to form the Highwaymen, Coe was left out entirely, a ghost in the very movement he helped start. For Coe, it was the ultimate insult. watching his brothers in rebellion form a band of legends while leaving him behind. Rumors swirled that Willie never trusted Coe's unpredictable nature, that his prison past and volatile temper were liabilities too dangerous for the brand. To Coe, that was betrayal. He had bled for the outlaw cause, and yet he was erased when history was written. He carried that resentment for decades, and when he finally spoke, he didn't soften the blow. He said plainly that he hated Nelson for being the smiling outlaw, the man who turned rebellion into merchandise, while Coe remained the true outlaw, paying the price every day of his life. For fans, it was almost unthinkable to hear, because to most, the two were icons of the same spirit. But Coe wanted the truth known before it was too late. He felt robbed of his rightful place, and in his mind, Nelson was at the center of that theft. The hate wasn't just jealousy. It was about being erased, about seeing his life's mission co-opted by someone who made it look easy. And that was something David Allan Coe would never forgive. Life on the road was where David Allan Coe sharpened his anger. And it was also where his rivalries grew into lasting hatred. Touring was supposed to be freedom, endless highways, roaring crowds, and the kind of raw connection with fans that made him feel alive. But in reality, the road was a battlefield. Promoters often paired Coe with other big-name artists, and those experiences became some of the ugliest chapters of his career. He never forgot the nights where he was deliberately shoved into the opening slot for artists he believed he outshined. He resented how other singers would laugh at him behind closed doors, mocking his ex-con background, his leather outfits, his refusal to conform. One name that burned in his memory was Merle Haggard. On stage, Haggard was beloved, a poet of the working man. But to Coe, Merle was condescending, dismissive, and cruel. Coe felt that Haggard looked down on him, treating him as less than an equal, like a dangerous sideshow who didn't belong on the same bill. The tension boiled during joint concerts, where Coe believed Haggard intentionally tried to overshadow him, changing set times, demanding more money, and making sure promoters catered to him while Coe was left with scraps. To Coe, it was a game of humiliation, and he hated Haggard for it. Then there were the barroom confrontations. Coe was never shy about his temper, and when musicians whispered that he was nothing but a prison thug with a guitar, he met them face to face. Some backed down, others didn't, and fists were thrown more than once. These road rivalries painted a clear picture in Coe's mind. Nashville stars weren't just fellow artists. They were enemies who wanted him buried. Each insult, each dirty trick, and each stolen spotlight fueled his growing list. Coe would say later that the road was where he truly learned who his enemies were, because away from the cameras and record executives, masks came off. He saw the arrogance, the jealousy, and the false smiles. And it hardened him even more. The hate wasn't about bruised pride, it was survival. For every night he stood on stage, Coe believed he was fighting not just for applause, but for his very existence in a world that never wanted him in the first place. When David Allan Coe finally laid his cards on the table, the second and third names on his hate list showed just how deep his grudges ran. The second was Garth Brooks, a name that shocked fans because Garth represented an entirely different generation of country music. To the mainstream, Garth Brooks was the man who reinvented the genre, turning concerts into stadium spectacles and blending country with pop in a way that filled arenas. But to Coe, Garth symbolized everything wrong with Nashville: the corporatization, the polish, the slick packaging that buried raw emotion beneath smoke machines and pyrotechnics. Coe despised him for turning country into what he called a circus act, and he never forgave the industry for crowning Brooks as the savior of country, while ignoring the outlaws who had risked their lives and reputations to keep the music authentic. Coe once snarled that Garth was the McDonald's of country music, and that hatred was rooted not just in style, but in principle. Coe believed that Brooks stole the soul out of the genre and handed it over to corporate America on a silver platter. The third name was another shock: Kris Kristofferson. Fans assumed Coe respected Kristofferson, a songwriter's songwriter, a man who had penned classics like Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down. But for Coe, Kristofferson was a reminder of betrayal. While Kristofferson was welcomed into the Highwaymen alongside Willie, Waylon, and Johnny Cash, Coe was shut out once again. He saw Kris not as a brother in arms, but as a gatekeeper who never extended a hand. Worse, Coe believed Kristofferson looked down on him intellectually, dismissing him as a roughneck who lacked the poetic depth to stand alongside the so-called legends. To Coe, that was hypocrisy, because he knew his own catalog contained songs as haunting and true as anything Kristofferson ever wrote. Being overlooked was one thing. Being dismissed by someone he considered a peer was another wound entirely. Naming Kristofferson wasn't just about rivalry. It was about the pain of being excluded from the history books, of being made invisible while others were lifted high. Together, these two names, Brooks, the corporate king, and Kristofferson, the poet who shut him out, revealed the range of Coe's fury. It wasn't limited to one generation or one style. His hatred cut across eras, across friendships, across the very foundation of country music. And he carried those names with him for decades, burning quietly until the day he decided the world had to know the truth. If there was one source of venom that ran deeper than rival singers, it was the suits behind the curtain. David Allan Coe hated the record executives, the managers and the promoters who played God with careers. And when he spoke about them, the anger in his voice was almost unbearable. He believed they were cowards in ties, men who never wrote a song, never stepped onto a stage, never lived the life, yet controlled the fate of those who did. He accused them of using him, milking his songs for other artists, then discarding him like trash when he wouldn't bend to their rules. One story he told involved a record executive who promised him creative freedom on an album, only to gut the project behind his back, removing the rawest tracks because they were deemed too controversial. To Coe, that wasn't just censorship, it was theft of his identity. He hated how the industry would smile to his face while stabbing him the moment he turned his back. And he never forgot the promoters who would book him for a show, then deliberately slash his set time so a bigger name could shine. Coe once said that in his world, betrayal was worse than failure. If he failed, it was on him. If he was betrayed, it was because someone he trusted decided he wasn't worth honesty. That was the wound that hardened into hate. But the backstabbers weren't just nameless suits. Some of them were fellow musicians who wore two faces. On stage, they'd pretend to be brothers in the outlaw movement, but in meetings with executives, they'd quietly push Coe aside, warning that his presence would scare sponsors and alienate radio. He was certain that whispers from those supposed friends cost him millions. He hated the hypocrisy of men who sang about rebellion while making backroom deals to stay safe. To Coe, the outlaw image wasn't a brand, it was his life, forged in prison yards, biker bars, and a world that never gave him a second chance. When he saw others selling rebellion like a t-shirt while pushing him out of the picture, it made his blood boil. He hated not only the lies, but the cowardice, because in his world, a man either stood tall or bowed down. Nashville, he said, was full of bowing men. That was why his list of hatred included not only singers, but the shadows behind them. And it was why, even at 85, he still refused to forgive. When David Allan Coe dug deeper into his hate list, the fourth, fifth, and sixth names exposed just how wide his grudges stretched. The fourth was George Jones. To fans, Jones was the Possum, one of the greatest country singers who ever lived. A man with a voice that could break hearts with a single note. But to Coe, Jones was not a hero. He was a backstabber. Early on, Coe wrote songs that Jones recorded, and those recordings brought hits. But instead of loyalty, Coe felt only betrayal. He believed Jones took his songs, cashed the checks, and then refused to give him the credit or respect he deserved. Worse, Coe never forgave Jones for mocking him behind the scenes, painting him as a clown in front of other artists. For Coe, respect was everything, and once it was denied, there was no coming back. The fifth name was Hank Williams Jr. To the world, Bokufus was another outlaw, a wild man carrying his father's torch into new territory. But to Coe, Hank Jr. was a poser who copied the outlaw lifestyle without paying the same dues. He hated how Hank Jr. made millions selling an image that Coe believed he lived more authentically. When fans would compare the two, Coe would fume, saying Hank Jr. never spent years in prison, never clawed his way from the dirt, never faced death for his choices. To Coe, that made Hank's outlaw image a costume, and he hated him for being celebrated as something Coe saw as fake. The sixth name hit even harder, Johnny Cash. For many, Cash was the ultimate outlaw, the man in black who stood with the downtrodden and gave country music its gravitas. But Coe never forgave Cash for shutting him out. Cash was part of the highwaymen, part of the circle of legends who defined the movement, and Coe's absence from that circle haunted him. He believed Cash saw him as too unpredictable, too dangerous, too much of a liability. For Coe, that was personal. He hated Cash not just for leaving him out, but for what that exclusion symbolized, that he wasn't considered good enough to stand with the giants of his own generation. Each of these names carried a different wound. Jones for betrayal, Hank Jr. for fraudulence, Cash for rejection. And together, they showed the pattern of Coe's life. Everywhere he turned, doors closed, respect withheld, history written without him. At 85, when he finally revealed them, he didn't care how shocking it sounded. He wanted the truth carved into memory. These were the men he hated, and nothing would erase it. The seventh and final name David Allan Coe revealed was Waylon Jennings, and it was the one that stunned fans the most. To the outside world, Coe and Waylon seemed cut from the same cloth, brothers in rebellion who rejected Nashville's rules and carved their own paths. But to Coe, Waylon represented the ultimate betrayal. In the early days of the outlaw movement, Coe looked to Waylon as a comrade, someone who would stand shoulder to shoulder with him against the industry machine. But as the years went on, he felt abandoned. Waylon, in Coe's eyes, chose the spotlight over solidarity, choosing record deals, tours, and collaborations that pushed Coe further into the shadows. The deepest wound came when the highwaymen, Waylon, Willie, Johnny, and Chris, became a cultural phenomenon. To Coe, that was his crown stolen in broad daylight. He believed he belonged there, that his outlaw scars were as real and valid as any of theirs, but he was left out, erased, as if he had never existed in the movement he helped ignite. That exclusion cut deeper than any insult, because it wasn't just personal, it rewrote history without him. Coe felt that Waylon, more than anyone else, could have spoken up, could have insisted that he be included, could have validated his place among the outlaws. But he didn't. And in Coe's mind, that silence was louder than betrayal. it became hate. He would later describe how every time he saw the Highwaymen perform, every time he heard their records, it was like being punched in the chest. The songs reminded him not of unity, but of abandonment. He hated Waylon not just as a man, but as the symbol of everything Coe lost. To him, Jennings was proof that even in rebellion, there were hierarchies, cliques, and closed doors. That final name was the most shocking, because it wasn't about jealousy of fame or bitterness over style. It was about trust broken. Waylon had once been the closest thing to a brother in arms, and when that brother turned away, Coe's heart hardened forever. By naming Jennings as the last on his list, Coe showed fans the rawest truth of all. His hate wasn't casual, it was born of betrayal, and no amount of time could erase that. When David Allan Coe, at the age of 85, finally revealed the 7 musicians he hated most, it was more than a list of names. It was a window into the soul of a man who had never known peace with the world around him. For some, it was shocking to hear him aim his fury at legends like Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Johnny Cash, and Waylon Jennings. For others, it was expected, because Coe had always lived on the jagged edge of truth, never softening his words to protect reputations or industry myths. His list wasn't gossip, it was confession. It was the sound of a man who had carried grudges for decades, letting them fester until they became a part of him. And in the end, he chose not to take them to the grave, but to spit them out, raw and unfiltered, just as he had lived. What makes this revelation so haunting is that it forces fans to confront the darker side of the outlaw movement. For years, the image of the outlaws has been romanticized, brothers in rebellion standing tall against Nashville's polished machine. But Coe's truth strips away the romance. Behind the camaraderie were jealousies, exclusions, betrayals, and wounds that never healed. He was the outlaw who never fully fit in, the man always standing just outside the circle, and his list was proof that the outlaw brotherhood wasn't as unbreakable as fans believed. Yet for all the bitterness, Coe's story is also one of survival. Unlike many of the names he despised, Coe never softened, never bent to the industry, never traded his edge for comfort. He may not have been embraced like Willie or Waylon, but he remained the most uncompromising of them all. Even his hatreds tell that story. He hated not out of pettiness, but because he believed those men had betrayed the values they claimed to uphold. He hated them for selling out, for shutting him out, for standing on stages that he believed should have been his too. And whether fans agree or not, it is impossible to deny that Coe's convictions were carved from real scars. At 85, his revelations feel less like an angry rant and more like a final ledger, the closing of accounts with a world that never truly accepted him. His legacy, for better or worse, is now intertwined with that list. When fans remember David Allan Coe, they will remember the songs, the haunting ballads, the raunchy anthems, the outlaw declarations, but they will also remember the fire. They will remember the man who, even in his twilight years, refused to play nice, refused to rewrite his feelings to fit the narrative, and refused to let his truth die untold. In that sense, his hate is part of his authenticity. He was never the smiling outlaw. He was the outlaw who never smiled, the one who lived and died by the sword of honesty. And maybe that is the truest definition of outlaw of them all. Because long after the names on his list are remembered for their music, David Allan Coe will be remembered for something else, the courage or the madness to say aloud what others would only whisper. In the end, that is his final act of rebellion, his final song. Not sung with a guitar, but spoken with a trembling voice, naming the men he hated most, daring the world to judge him, and walking away, knowing he never bowed, not even once.